you ever turned on your faucet and wondered who's really behind the water flowing out? It's not just your local utility company. A small group of mega corporations are quietly taking over our most precious resource, and they're not stopping at your tap water. Let me introduce you to the water barons. Names like Bechtel, Vivendi, and Suez might not ring a bell, but these corporate giants are making waves in the world of water. They're not content with just one city or country. No, their reach is global, and their influence runs deep. You might be thinking, why would big companies want to control our water? Well, they'll tell you it's about efficiency and conservation. They claim that private companies can manage water resources better than public utilities. But as you can imagine, there's more to this story. As the saying goes, follow the money. It applies here too. These corporations aren't just interested in quenching our thirst, they're thirsty for profits, and water is becoming liquid gold.
You know, for years and generations, wars have been fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water.
Think about it. We need water to live. It's not like we can choose not to buy it. And as clean water becomes scarcer, its value only goes up. These companies know this, and they're positioning themselves to cash in. But here's where it gets really interesting. These water barons aren't just buying up water systems. They're shaping policies, influencing governments, and even changing how we think about water. Is water a human right? Or is it a commodity to be bought and sold?
And it's about strengthening up our nation around a commodity that is a precious commodity.
Right here in the United States, private companies are buying up local water and sewer systems. In Pennsylvania, a law called Act 12 made it easier for corporations to acquire these systems. Guess what happened next? Water rates went through the roof.
Pennsylvania American Water customers are going to pay more for their water.
People's water bills are literally doubling.
The utility wants to increase residential water rates 22%. A monthly bill of $50 would become $61. Wastewater bills would increase 37%.
One of the water wars that Kamala was talking about already took place in the year 2000. The Cochabamba Water War took place in Bolivia. When Bechtel took over the water system, prices skyrocketed. People couldn't afford basic access to water. The result? Widespread protests that shook the entire country. More on that later in the video. Now you might be wondering, is this legal? How can they just take control of our water? The truth is, it's happening right under our noses, often with the blessing of our own governments. These corporations have deep pockets and teams of lawyers. They know how to navigate the system and get what they want. Water scarcity is a growing problem worldwide. Climate change, population growth, and overuse are straining our water resources. By 2025, 2/3 of the world's population could face water shortages. In this context, whoever controls the water holds immense power.
Highlighting water as a global commons and what it means to work together and see it both out of that kind of global commons perspective, but also the self-interest perspective, because it does have that parallel.
So the next time you turn on the tap, remember, you're not just using water, you're tapping into a complex web of corporate interests, political maneuvering, and global competition.
And water is something that people understand. Did we actually manage to vaccinate everyone in the world? No. Water, every kid knows how important it is to have water.
The question is, are we going to sit back and let these water barons decide our future, or are we going to take a stand?
And water is something that people understand.
Now you might be thinking, surely our governments are handling this, right? Well, not exactly. Enter the concept of water privatization. It's not just about who owns your local water system anymore. We're talking about a global grab for our most precious resource. Who's behind this? The usual suspects. Massive corporations and international financial institutions. They're not just buying water rights, they're reshaping how we think about water itself. Remember that question about taking a stand? Well, the people of Cochabamba, Bolivia didn't just stand, they fought back. And their story might just change how you think about that water flowing from your tap. Picture this. You wake up one morning, turn on your faucet, and suddenly your water bill has doubled. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, for the people of Cochabamba, it was reality. The culprit? A little company called Bechtel Corporation. Bechtel, through a subsidiary, had taken control of Cochabamba's water system. They promised efficiency, but what they delivered was a shocking price hike. For some families, water costs shot up to a quarter of their monthly income. Can you imagine spending 25% of your paycheck just to have water? But here's where it gets interesting. The people of Cochabamba didn't just grumble and pay up, they took to the streets. Protests erupted across the city, and we're not talking about a few signs and chants. This was a full-blown uprising. The government's response? They sent in troops. Martial law was declared. It was water versus guns, and things got ugly fast. Hundreds were arrested, many were injured, and tragically, a 17-year-old student named Victor Hugo Daza lost his life, shot in the face by the army. The Bolivians' demand was simple: kick Bechtel out. Now you might think this is just another sad story of corporate greed crushing the little guy, but here's the twist. The people won. The Bolivian government, faced with unrelenting protests, had no choice. They revoked Bechtel's contract. But the story doesn't end there. Bechtel, not happy about losing their golden goose, filed a complaint against Bolivia. They wanted $25 million in compensation for a contract they couldn't even fulfill because of public outrage. Talk about adding insult to injury. The Cochabamba water war became a symbol of resistance against water privatization worldwide. It showed that when people unite, they can take on even the biggest corporations. But it also exposed the ugly truth about what happens when water becomes a commodity. Here's something to ponder. After Bechtel left, Cochabamba's water system went back to public hands. But guess what? Problems persisted. Corruption, poor service, lack of investment. These issues didn't magically disappear. So what's the lesson here? Is private control of water the problem? Or is it deeper than that? Are we looking at a fundamental clash between viewing water as a human right and seeing it as a product to be bought and sold? Next time you turn on your tap, think about Cochabamba. Think about the people who fought and died for their right to water. And ask yourself, could it happen here? Are we really so different from those Bolivian protesters? Or are we just waiting for our own water war to begin? You might think the water wars are something that only happens in far-off lands. But what if I told you the battle for control of our water is happening right here in America? It's not fought with guns and protests like in Bolivia. No, this is a quieter, more insidious takeover. Have you ever heard of Act 12? It sounds harmless enough, doesn't it? Just another law with a boring name. But this Pennsylvania law, passed in 2016, opened the floodgates for private companies to buy up local water systems. And guess what? They're not targeting the troubled systems that need help. They're going after the healthy ones. Why would they do that? It's simple: profit. These companies aren't in the business of water, they're in the business of making money. And Act 12 lets them do just that by inflating the value of these systems. Now you might be thinking, so what? If a private company can run the system better, isn't that good for everyone? Well, not exactly. According to Bill Ferguson, founder of the group Keep Water Affordable from New Garden, Pennsylvania, his water bill used to be $234 for 13,000 gallons. After Aqua Pennsylvania took over, it jumped to $413 for 12,000 gallons. That's right, he's paying more for less water. And Bill's not alone. On average, people with private water systems pay nearly 60% more than those with public systems. In Pennsylvania, it's even worse, 84% more. That's over $300 extra per year, just for the privilege of having a corporation control your water. Take Aqua Pennsylvania, for example. They're a subsidiary of Essential Utilities, a corporation that raked in $2 billion in revenue in 2023. That's billion with a B.
$1 billion.
and they paid nearly $30 million for Newgarden's sewer system. Now you might be wondering, how can they get away with this? Well, it turns out the water industry has some powerful friends. The National Association of Water Companies, the industry's top lobbying group, is run by Robert F. Powelson. The chair of that same commission, Stephen DeFrank, used to be a lobbyist for Pennsylvania American Water. Are you starting to see the pattern here? It's not just about water anymore. It's about power, influence, and cold, hard cash.
We're taking home cold hard cash.
But here's a glimmer of hope. People are starting to fight back. In Bucks County, residents managed to stop a $1 billion deal to sell their water system. In Tawamencin, they even changed their town charter to try and block the sale of their sewer system. And now, some lawmakers are waking up to the problem. There's talk in the Pennsylvania legislature about new bills to slow down these corporate takeovers and stop the rate hikes. Some are even calling for Act 12 to be repealed entirely. But what if I told you that the battle for our taps is just the beginning? Have you ever stopped to consider the true cost of our insatiable thirst? It's not just about who controls the water, it's about what's happening to the water itself. Let's talk about something you might not have heard of: aquifers. These underwater reservoirs are like nature's water banks, slowly filled over thousands of years. But we're making some massive withdrawals, and the balance isn't looking good. Take the Ogallala Aquifer for example. Ever heard of it? It stretches from Texas to South Dakota and is crucial for farming in the Great Plains. Here's the kicker: we're draining it 8 times faster than it could refill itself. 8 times! Can you imagine what happens when this water bank goes bust? And it's not just happening in America. In Beijing, the water table has dropped more than 100 feet in just 40 years. That's like the height of a 10-story building. Imagine the ground beneath your feet slowly sinking year after year. Now let's talk about California. You might think of sunshine and Hollywood, but did you know it's also home to some of the biggest water hogs in the country? Enter the Resnicks, billionaire owners of a wonderful company. These people own enough farmland to cover 4 cities the size of San Francisco, and water rights, they got those locked down too. But here's where it gets really interesting. Back in 1994, there was a secret meeting known as the Monterey Amendments. This meeting transferred ownership of the Kern Water Bank to private contractors, including the Resnicks. Just like that, public water became private profit. And speaking of profit, let's talk about those bottles of water you see everywhere. Ever wonder about the real cost of that convenience? Companies like Coca-Cola and Nestle aren't just selling you water, they're depleting entire ecosystems to do it. In California, Nestle has been accused of over-extracting water from Native American reservations. As if they haven't lost enough, now instead of losing their land, they're losing their water. All to sell it back to us at a premium. But here's the real kicker. According to William Finnegan in The New Yorker, quote, "The world is running out of fresh water. By 2025, the demand for our water around the world is expected to exceed supply by 56%, end quote. That's not in some distant future, that's right around the corner. And it's not just about having enough water to drink. Producing bottled water requires massive amounts of energy and water. It's like we're using water to make water. Does that make any sense to you? So the next time you reach for that bottle of water, or turn on your tap, or even flush your toilet, remember, every drop counts. And right now, those drops are adding up to a flood of problems that we can't ignore any longer. Have you ever wondered what happens when that complex web of interest we just talked about starts to unravel? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into a world where water isn't just a commodity, it's a weapon. It's not just about higher bills or corporate profits anymore. We're talking about something much darker. Did you know that water scarcity is expected to displace 700 million people in the coming years? That's more than twice the population of the United States, all forced to leave their homes because of water. But here's where it gets really interesting. The United Nations thinks by 2025, 2/3 of us will be living in water-scarce areas. That's right, sooner than you think, most of us could be fighting over water. And I'm not talking about arguing with your neighbor over a sprinkler. We're talking about real conflicts, potentially even wars. You might be thinking, wars over water? That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's already happening. The UN has identified 5 hotspots for future water wars: the Nile, the Ganges, the Indus River, Tigris, Euphrates, and the Colorado River. These aren't just random places on a map, they're potential flashpoints for global conflict. Now you might be wondering, how bad could it really be? Well, let me tell you about Yemen. This country is facing severe water scarcity, and it's not just making people thirsty, it's fueling violence and political instability. People are literally fighting and dying over water. And it's not just Yemen. Have you heard about what's happening in Gaza? Up to 95% of their underwater aquifer is polluted. Imagine turning on your tap and knowing that almost every drop of water is unfit for human consumption. It's not just a crisis, it's a ticking time bomb. But let's talk about the West Bank. Palestinian farmers are facing restrictions and challenges in accessing water. Why? Because Israeli control over water resources is a major point of contention. I'm not just talking about farming here, we're talking about survival. In fact, the Colorado River frequently runs dry before reaching Mexico. Can you imagine that? A major river just disappearing before it reaches its destination. These conflicts aren't always caused by scarcity itself. Often, it's threats like pollution or upstream damming that light the fuse. It's not just about how much water there is, it's about who controls it, who pollutes it, and who decides where it goes. So next time you hear about tensions in the Middle East, or unrest in Africa, or even disputes between states here in the US, ask yourself, is this really about politics or religion or borders? Or is it about something much more basic, the fight for water, the essence of life itself?